Thank you, Wesley. That was awesome. Thank you. All right, so good morning, good early afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Triumph Life Center's virtual gathering. Today is Sunday, June 28th. Woo! We're happy to have you here, and we're happy to be together once more online. I wish I could hug you all. But today we're going to be speaking about a number of topics, but specifically we're going to be talking about justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So we'll see how it goes. A quote that we would like to share. What we can see depends heavily on what our culture has trained us to look for. And this is a quote from a book that's called The History of White People by Nell Irvin Painter. It's a pretty good book. I just started reading it. You should definitely take a look. And again, it's called The History of White People. And it's kind of looking at history in the perspective, instead of focusing so much on Black history and maybe considering that viewpoint, it's turning it around and looking at the oppressors themselves and maybe how did they get to that point and why are they the way that they are. Cool. So let's start with our usual meditation. Let's relax your body, take some breaths, maybe slow down your breathing a little bit. Get your body in a comfortable position, whatever that might look for you, and breathe with me. We are together here and now. Breathe with me. Breath is life, and life is in the breath. Breathe with me. We are together as one in unity of action, unity of love, and unity of purpose. We choose life, so I invite you now to breathe with me. The time is now. Place your attention on the breath. Notice how it feels when you breathe in through your nostrils. Notice how your chest and your stomach moves as the air moves in and out of your body. Notice any tense points, maybe in your neck, in your hips, in your feet. How does everything feel? Check in, do a body scan, and continue breathing. Feel the rhythm of your breath and breathe in what you need and let go of the rest. Breathe in what you need and let go of the rest. I breathe. I live. Breath. Breathe in the life. Breathe in and live. I breathe and I love. I breathe in love. And I let go of the rest. Same. Together, we have strengthened ourselves and purpose to better relate to self, others, and the environment. Let's take one more breath together. And shake it out a little bit. Ashe. So again, welcome to our gathering. We're so happy to have you on Facebook Live. Hello, awareness to a very important issue that we don't often hear about, and that is the plight of of Indigenous peoples, and especially missing Indigenous women. We invite you to join us in prayer and affirmation that will lift your spirit. We'll also listen intently to our guest speakers. And we hope that you will make a commitment to join us in prayer and action on behalf of our Indigenous sisters. During this unprecedented time in our collective history, it may be easy to lose sight of the suffering of others outside of your own community or family. So in this gathering today, we seek to not only in our collective ability to lift our human family to higher heights. So today we were expecting to have a speaker from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women USA organization. However, the speaker contacted us and told us that they were not able to be here with us today. However, we do have someone, Miss Amina from the Red Hawk Council. Their council has joined with us before, virtually and also in person. So we're very, very happy to have you. Thank you for being here. We invite everyone that's watching to spend the next hour with us. Invite a friend, tell them that we're streaming live. You can also share this on your own social media platform. And as always, the Christ in me celebrates the Christ in you. Together, we'll make our world brand new. This is the only all people, whatever their nationality or culture or religion. This Creator made us all. This Creator made us in all our diversity from one original person, allowing each culture to have its own time to develop, giving each its own place to live and thrive, and we have our opening prayer.
Great rising.
It's called. Go ahead.
Great rising, everyone. Opening prayer. Unity of all by Hanto Yo. Let us pray. God of surprises, He pull us from the narrowness of our traditions to new ways of being church, from the captivities of our culture to creative witness for justice, from the smallness of our horizons to the bigness of your vision. Clear the way in us, your people, that we might call others to freedom and renewed faith. Clear the way in us, your people, that we might call others to wholeness and integrity. Great Spirit, you call us from fear to faithfulness, from clutter to clarity, from a desire to control to deeper trust, from the refusal to love to the readiness to risk. Clear the way in us, your people, that we might all know the beauty and power and danger of the gospel. Ashe.
Thank you. Let me share with you some information about Triumph Life Center. Triumph Life Center opened on October 19th, 2019, under the umbrella of Triumph, the Church of the New Age International, which was founded in 1904. We seek to further the work of founder Bishop Elias Dempsey Smith, who had a vision of a New World system that he fully believed was attainable through the shared practice of spiritual principles that would lead to our collective awakening or higher expression of the divine. Triumph Life Center's vision is of an interdependent community formed from the tapestry of our individual and collective experiences of the divine that fosters both an embodied spirituality and epistemology as pathways to establishing a new world where all may share in the fullness of life. Triumph Life Center's mission is to promote the creation of new cultural practices and social and economic systems that are egalitarian, affirms our shared humanity, and hold sacred the earth and all life forms. To create a safe and sacred space where marginalized individuals and communities who may not have equal access to opportunities can connect up to expand both their spiritual and intellectual life and gain access to opportunities for personal growth through shared resources and support for developing spiritual gifts and intellectual pursuits. To honor the Sabbath as a time for individual and collective, spiritual, physical, emotional, and mental well-being through shared music, spoken word, sacred readings, and a communal meal. Triumph Life Center's goal is to be a hub for conversations envisioning a new world order, creative arts expressions, emerging social entrepreneurships, promoting community-owned sustainable food systems for access to healthy living, expanding reverence and care for the earth and all life forms, forming alliances and building bridges across community barriers that mutually affirm our shared humanity. People of all faiths, cultures, ethnicities, races, genders, orientations, abilities, personal challenges, such as the history of incarceration, mental health issues, addictions, physical health, citizenship, etc., to be in community with each other on one accord.
Peace. Okay, today's affirmations. Affirmations for self. I forgive myself and I forgive others. This is an act of self love. I let go of past hurts and grievances, and in this moment, I am free. I seek justice and I give mercy generously. This is an act of self love. I seek peace, but I always speak my truth, and in this, I am free. Affirmations for our communities. We affirm that social justice is the work of love and it is restoring our community right now. We affirm that forgiveness and reconciliation are possible and they are being manifested now. We affirm that compassion, public safety is possible and it is being manifested now. We affirm that respect for life is a basic human right for everyone and it is being manifested now. Affirmations for our planet. MJ. Today we affirm that our planet is being restored to perfect ecological balance. Today we affirm that Mother Earth cares for us all and we care for Mother Earth, sorry. Today we choose to live in harmony with nature and all living things. Today we are healed, we are made whole, and we have enough of everything we need to live a joyful and fulfilling life. Ashe.
Thank you.
Prayer of life and hope. Great Spirit, we offer this prayer for our shared grief and the loss of loved ones in our communities of color and our beloved Indigenous sisters and brothers. Eternal Spirit, we pray for comfort for the affiliate and act for justice and healing for the broken. Feed us this day at the table of life and hope so that we may walk in the ways of gentleness and peace in this world, that we may keep our hearts and minds from callous indifference to racism, sexism, and violence. We call forth our people from all four directions on today so that we may flourish in the beautiful life that resides within us and manifests through us from creation. Ashe.
No Pressure by Travis Mills. You got time, don't worry. You got my help, don't worry. You are beautiful, don't worry. I value you, don't worry. You don't see it, but I'm making a way for you, so don't worry. Stress for the weak, I made you strong, so don't worry. It don't have to be perfect, don't worry. I had to make you confident, don't worry. Don't worry about being first, just finish. Everything you lost, I will replenish. So give me your problems and let's get back to unfinished business. No Pressure by Travis Mills.
When the mind is trapped, beating with lies and violence, past traumas is what hold us back. When you love yourself to the fullest, the hate can't win. Love yourself so much you can't sin. What if I teach you to water yourself from within? What if I told you Babylon is real? What if I told you God and I made a deal? And my mission must be fulfilled. Spiritual Warfare by Travis Mills.
We've been watching for a long time. To endure so much and still have a pure heart. We can't rewind time, but we can give you a fresh start. What you've been through, will become beautiful art. Welcome home. This is the place your scars will become testimonies. Your birth will be a ceremony. Welcome home. This is where you belong. Welcome to Triumph Church.
All right, thank you, everybody. That was awesome. Also, the last poem, Travis. Welcome to Triumph Church. That's cool. Thank you. And thank you, Wesley, for the music as always. Uh, so, before we get into our main discussion, today on my end, I wanted to share something that I've been reading, that I've been learning about, and that's Ida B. Wells. So, I kind of just came across a video about her, and I read a little bit more about her, and then I found this book. I got all excited and I ordered it, and I recently got it in the mail. So, I'm still starting off with reading it, but I felt very inspired to share about it, especially because while I was reading it, it was talking about how what was in these pages was published on June 25th, and I was reading it like on June 24th, and I was like, whoa, June 25th, 1892. So more than 100 years ago. Um, Ida B. Wells is was an investigative journalist, an educator, and a civil rights leader. I remember hearing her name like in my textbook when I was growing up, like in my social studies class, but I didn't learn that much, which is not a surprise at this point. A lot of our history that we're taught in public schools and private schools in this country are very whitewashed. Um, so I wanted to go deeper and to really read her words. This particular publication, this book, is a trilogy which contains 3 of her essays that she wrote about lynching that was happening in the South. So she had a paper that was called The Free Speech. And her office and her publication in general was just like totally destroyed by the Southern white community. They were feeling very threatened by her and the the information that she was sharing with everyone. So at the time of when the free speech, her paper was destroyed, she was in New York. And she says that she got letters and telegrams sent me in New York where I was spending my vacation that advised me that bodily harm awaited my return. So her life was threatened against just because she was reporting and telling her truth, her community's truth. So I wanted to share the preface that I read. She says, "The greater part of what is contained in these pages was published in the New York Age, June 25th, 1892, in explanation of the editorial which the Memphis whites considered sufficiently infamous to justify the destruction of my paper, the Free Speech. Since the appearance of that statement, requests have come from all parts of the country that Exiled, the name under which it then appeared, be issued in pamphlet form. Some donations were made, but not enough for that purpose. The noble effort of the ladies of New York and Brooklyn, October 5th, have enabled me to comply with this request and give the world a true, unvarnished account of the causes of lynch law in the South." And she goes on to say, "It is a contribution to truth, an array of facts, the pursuit of which it is hoped will stimulate this great American Republic to demand that justice be done through the heavens fall. Though the heavens fall. It is with no pleasure I have dipped my hands in the corruption here exposed. Somebody must show that the Afro-American race is more sinned against than sinning, and it seems to have fallen upon me to do so. The awful death roll that Judge Lynch is calling every week is appalling, not only because of the lives it takes, the rank cruelty and outrage to the victims, but because of the prejudice it fosters and the stain it places against the good name of a weak race. The Afro-American is not a bestial race. If this work can contribute in any way toward proving this, and at the same time arouse the conscience of the American people to a demand for justice to every citizen and punishment by law for the lawless, I shall feel I have done my race a service, and other considerations are of minor importance." So honestly, I think that was very courageous of her to speak, and how she even had said, I don't know why I'm in this position that I have to expose this truth and share all of this. And I don't really want to, but I'm still going to do it because it's the right thing to do. And even later on, she kind of mentioned something that's still quite relevant for today. This quote, "Men who stand high in the esteem of the public for Christian character, for moral and physical courage, for devotion to the principles of equal and exact justice to all, stand as cowards who fear to open their mouths before this great outrage. They do not see that by their tacit encouragement, their silence, the black shadow of lawlessness in the form of lynch law is spreading its wings over the whole country." And that's something that we're still hearing today in the phrase, "silence is violence." By not speaking up on the injustices that you see, that you experience in your daily life, you are perpetuating the oppression and the violence. That's all I have to share for this. If anyone wants to unmute themselves and comment, or if they have any questions, I can also put a link to this particular book in the chat and on Facebook as well, if you're interested in reading more. If not, we can continue on. Let me just take a second. So today, we were going to have a speaker from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women USA organization. They're unfortunately not able to be here with us, but we still want to share some information about their organization and what we have learned. So I'll read this introduction that was on their website. MMIW USA's #1 mission is to bring our missing home and help the family of the murdered cope and support them through the process of grief. We give them hands-on support and guidance, and if we don't have the answers, we get the answers so that these families do not feel abandoned and alone in this struggle like so many have before them. Our broader goal is to eradicate this problem so that the future generations thrive. We are doing that through education of the threats that they face and self-defense. We just started a monthly program to do that called Staying Sacred, and we educate and have self-defense lessons at every meeting. Our strength lies in the fact that every single one of the staff and volunteers have been assaulted or trafficked, and our passion is to be the kind of organization that we needed growing up and beyond. Their work is dedicated to Amy Lynn Hansen and Sherry Ann, who are two women that were integral in the early days of this organization. Amy's situation was the first family contact that Deborah, who was going to be a representative of this organization. So Amy's situation was the first family contact that she had as a native liaison at Missing in New Mexico. And it was through her sister Christy's eyes that she saw the hell that the families went through and are still going through today. And Sherry's story was quite the same. And families like these are why we do what we do. So I'm thinking at this point, let's introduce who we do have with us today. We have Amina, and she's here with us from the Red Hawk Council. So please, I'm sorry we don't have a proper introduction for you, but please tell us about yourself, tell us about the work that you do, and what brought you here today.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for just sharing this beautiful space. I'm honored to be a part of it. So I work with Red Hawk. I'm actually in North Carolina. I've danced with them at different programs before and done different speaking engagements through them. But I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Pembroke, North Carolina. I'm a member of the Lumbee tribe, and my father's actually African American as well. So I come to you with this issue from a very specific lens, being from a Southeastern tribe and also being a Black woman as well. So I'm excited to share what I have with you guys, and I think the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women USA group is wonderful, and there's so many organizations across the country that have been really tackling this issue, and it's been led by all of these wonderful matriarchs who have been working on resolving this issue for decades. And I really am inspired by the work of the people who've come before me, including my own mother and some of the matriarchs in my own community. And you know, we're constantly trying to come together and create solidarity and you know, really work together to figure out how to help families who are suffering from losing their loved ones, and help victims who come home and don't know how to cope with what they've been through. So we're constantly working on solutions to help these individuals.
Thank you. Welcome. So I'm thinking this is going to be kind of like an open discussion. You can share with us the information that you do have. A lot of us here are not very familiar with this topic, so there's a lot that we have to learn. And we're open to hearing your own personal experiences as well as experiences of women across the country, across this continent, across the world. If anyone has questions, you're welcome to post it in the chat box on Zoom, or if you want to comment on the Facebook live stream, you can also do that, and we will have your comments brought to our speaker and to us as a whole. So let's start off, like, for someone who has possibly no idea or has never heard of this before, how would you describe what is going on and what has been going on?
It's an act and a new manifestation of colonialism. Um, so I look at this through a historical lens, and I think it's important to acknowledge the historical trauma in Indigenous and Black communities as well. But you know, Indigenous people were invaded, subdued, and murdered, and the women were raped. That was a part of acts of colonialism, to control the population. And it's important to understand that um, Indigenous groups in the United States are mostly matriarchal. So by attacking the women, they were really going after the backbone of our societies. And women were the ones that picked the leaders, that made the decisions together on councils. So that's also something important to think about from a historical context. And even today, we look at women as a portal from the spirit world to this world. You know, we through childbirth, through bringing life into the world, we have that divine connection. So in terms of what this issue has become or what colonialism has become today, or the acts that have come that are we're seeing today against our women, are a result of the attacks on Mother Earth with pipelines, ravaging the land, taking resources, abusing Mother Earth. And then an important thing to note is that when these corporations are installing these pipelines, these man camps pop up. And it's important to note that most of the assailants against Indigenous women are non-native people. So you have these people coming in from the outside that they see it's not necessarily vulnerability, but is they take the opportunity to take advantage of the women there. And I get emotional when I talk about this, so please forgive me. I have to constantly remind myself to remain grounded when talking about this. So forgive me if I take pauses, if I have to take a deep breath every now and then. It's a lot, and it's something that we've been fighting for a long time. And I'll get to the manifestations of what it's like in my own community. But please forgive me if I pause for a second. In the grander scheme of things, it's also important to understand what the Native people, what Native Americans represent to the U.S. government. We are a constant reminder of the crimes against humanity in the United States. And what I mean by that is looking at history with the genocide, the attempts to assimilate Native people, attempting to eradicate Native culture. And, you know, even with the boarding school experience, it was kill the Indian, save the man. Trying to create and eradicate Native American people has really contributed to also the erasure of Indigenous people and Indigenous culture. And during the removal periods, when we've been removed from our ancestral lands, it's kind of like to the general population, we're out of sight, out of mind. Our stories aren't told in the history books correctly. There's like these huge gaps of information that are missing about Indigenous people. And even like when you're listening to politics, talking about the election, like this past year is actually the most I've ever heard anyone talk about Indigenous issues. And I think a lot of that has to do with Standing Rock and the attention that the matriarchs and grassroots organizations have brought to this issue, And also the same grassroots organizations have brought to the environmental issues as well. People are starting to see us. And that's the thing about Missing and Murdered is one of the main factors to why Native women are more than 3 times more likely to be raped and murdered than white women is because of that out of sight, out of mind, that invisibility. So when you're not seen, you're not heard. So that's another contributing factor to the high rates and the belief that perpetrators have that they can take advantage of this population without repercussions. And so one of the things that's being addressed now is the legislative loopholes that allow these perpetrators to have do these acts of violence without any prosecution. So, for example, assailants that are not members of a tribal community are out of jurisdiction for the tribal governments or tribal police forces to prosecute. And so there's some communities that are already correcting that issue. So that's an improvement. And I'm not going to just talk about the negative aspects of this. Like I said, there's a lot of people who've been on the ground doing work on this, creating legislative solutions to this. But legislation is not enough. This is also a humanity issue. And so it's important to state that and make sure that people understand that just because we're getting these things starting in a legal setting doesn't mean that we can ignore that we need to address the erasure, the dehumanization of Native women.
Thank you. I want to say also, like, it's totally okay to be emotional about this. I think that it shows how genuine you are and how much you care about this, and it makes you seem human on the computer screen, you know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a little silly, but it's the truth. So, reminder to everybody, including myself, continue to breathe, take deep breaths. That breath is life. I wanted to share something that I did a little bit of research, and I found some information that you did kind of touch on a little bit that I just kind of wanted to share. In particular, I looked at this webpage that it's called Native Women's Association of Canada, and their mission is to help empower women by being involved in developing and changing legislation which affects them, and involving them in the development and delivery of programs promoting equal opportunity for Aboriginal women. And this is like a very large PDF document. Even just scrolling through like the table of contents, I learned a lot. I'll just read some of the headlines to you, I suppose, or the titles of each section. For example, majority of cases involve young women, girls. There's an intergenerational impact of missing and murdered women. Many are mothers. The majority of known cases in Canada occur in the western provinces, and most cases occur in urban areas. Nearly half of the murder cases that they know of remain unsolved. More than half of women and girls died in a residential dwelling. Aboriginal women and girls are more likely to be killed by a stranger than non-Aboriginal women. And Aboriginal women experience violence by both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal offenders. And involvement in prostitution is not a cause of disappearance or murder. You had also talked a bit about assimilation, and I think you had mentioned like boarding schools. So there was one little blurb or passage that I also wanted to share. It says government attacks on the social and cultural systems of Aboriginal nations through government legislation continued with the establishment of church-run residential and day schools. Operating from the 1800s to 1996, the residential school system saw Aboriginal children forcibly removed from their homes for the purposes of assimilation. Children frequently suffered physical, mental, sexual, and spiritual abuse, and many are known to have died from disease or malnutrition. These schools had a profound impact on the traditional family, community, and education systems of Aboriginal nations. As it has been said, the removal of children from their families altered relationships between everyone and everything. I also learned about something that's called the 60s scoop, where child welfare agencies were granted legal authority on reserve. So First Nations children were taken into care at an unbelievable rate. The 60s scoop is a term used to describe the time between 1960 and the mid-1980s, so about 25 years, when the greatest number of Aboriginal children were adopted. More than 11,000 of these children were adopted during this time. And in some instances, the children were like literally scooped from their homes without knowledge or consent from families or communities. And these children were adopted mainly by white families, which results in cultural dislocation and confused identities, and even abuse at the hands of their adopted families. So that was quite a lot of information that is incredibly traumatic. And I think it also it makes me understand more the injustice that the Native people are experiencing. It's almost like intersectionality of all these different injustices, and it gets to a point where it's incredibly overwhelming to read and to hear about. And like you were saying, it doesn't necessarily make them more vulnerable, but it kind of gives the government an excuse to take advantage.
It creates opportunity. Exactly. But yeah, it's when you start reading about boarding schools, I get knots in my stomach. I get knots in the chest. But and it's important to understand the psychological impact that it still has on Indigenous people today. It's important to recognize that, like, there's a point in time where my grandmother, my great-grandparents, they didn't want to be Native. It wasn't safe to be Native. You were in danger of being removed for being Native. You were targeted for being Native. And again, I always want to highlight the parallels, because one of my main goals as an activist is Indigenous and Black solidarity, because we have to recognize that we have more in common than we have differences when it comes, and our liberations are tied together. And so the historical trauma piece is important to note. And someone asked me if I live on a reservation, and I didn't grow up on a reservation. I'm still in a rural area. I grew up in a very rural area in North Carolina. But then there's also the conversation of non-federally recognized tribes versus federally recognized tribes. I come from a non-federally recognized tribe, or we have federal recognition, but we don't have full benefits. So we get benefits for housing, but we don't get benefits from IHS, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and bureaucracies like that. So we don't have what you would call full sovereignty, or we don't have we have a government relationship with the state, but not with the federal government. But we still have, it's just when we start getting into Native law, it gets a little bit more complex. But it's important to understand that too, because even with the legislation that's being passed, it's important to recognize whether or not it's impacting federally recognized tribes alone, or if it's inclusive to non-federally recognized tribes as well. So that kind of gets a little bit more complex as well. So in North Carolina, I'm part of this Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Board, and we're forming coalitions with different tribes across the state, non-federally recognized and federally recognized. So there's one federal recognized tribe in North Carolina, and that's the Eastern Band of Cherokee. But there's also 8 other tribes in North Carolina, and we all are dealing with this issue of our women going missing, our women being murdered. One of the since 1994, we've had this increase in trafficking. And the most, I think what really shook our community in Robeson County was when 3 women, all within weeks of each other, were murdered and dumped outside of our police department. Their bodies were found decomposing in trash cans. That year, there was 2 other women who were found murdered. There's a girl, she's not from my tribe, she's Hollow-Wasaponi, her name is Faith Hedgepath. Her murder has been unsolved for 8 years. She was a student at University of North Carolina, and she was found murdered in her apartment. So I get emotional when I talk about her, because she, you know, I was a college student in North Carolina. You know, it could happen to, that when it comes so close to home, that it's like, you know, that could have been me, that could have been my sister, that could have been my cousin, that could have been my friend, you know. So, you know, it's important to understand statistics and the numbers about these things, but it's also important to like realize that numbers can only say so much. You know, we're talking about people's lives, we're talking about people's family members, we're talking about people's friends. So it's important to always remember that that the numbers can never say enough. And when you're talking to someone's family member, or you're talking to someone who will never get the peace that they need from losing a child or from losing their mother, it puts a different lens on things. But that's the work that organizations like Missing and Murdered USA and what we're trying to do here in North Carolina, that's what we want to do. We want to provide that type of support for those families. And it's important that we as Indigenous people are there for each other, and just having the fact that, you know, we're all on Indigenous land. This is all stolen land. Anyone that's not Native, you're not Indigenous to this land. Even there's a different type of reservation for stolen people, and we recognize that struggle too. But like, it's important to recognize that we all have a responsibility to take care of the Indigenous people, and any type of neglect of justice for Indigenous people, we're not going to continue. We're going to continue to keep going in circles with injustice in this country. So I don't know if you guys have any questions about that.
Thank you. Yes, during this time, if anyone wants to unmute themselves and speak, ask a question, make a comment, you're welcome to do that now.
Peace. My name's Bettina. I wanted to hit on what you said about and Natives, Indigenous people not stating that they are Indigenous. I remember me growing up, I asked my grandmother's from West Virginia, and I asked my grandmother, you know, are we Native? You know, are we Indian? And she told me, yeah, but never to put it on paper. So as I've gotten older, I'm realizing, I always knew I was different, but I'm realizing that I know that I am Indigenous and Indigenous to the land. And like you're saying, a lot of the whole land is Indigenous. And, you know, we are oldest, but we have to, first, we can't go back for anything to get anything because we don't realize who we are. because we've been named Black, colored, Negro all these years. So I want to say thank you for bringing that up, because that is true, and that's something that I've always questioned. Who am I? You know, I do know that I do come from Blackfoot and Sioux tribe. I know I am Cherokee as well. So I am in my own going back and to, you know, going back to realize and recognize exactly who I am. So I appreciate the story, because it connected for me and it was a bridge. So thank you.
Of course, but that's another important conversation, especially dealing with cases in the Southeast. And I would like to point out that the research that was done by the Urban Indian Health Institute, which is very popular and kind of has been circulating for the past couple of years, they did a wonderful job surveying the impact and the statistical analysis of you know, the rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women and all the causes that contribute to that from a socioeconomic perspective. I'm a science nerd, if you guys didn't know. but one of the things that's important to note is that there's a huge, if you look at the map of where they pulled the data, there's a huge chunk of information missing when it comes to the Southeast, except for Baltimore and parts of New York. Again, going back to the non-federally recognized tribe status, or just there's a data hole, and that's being addressed by organizations, UIC, Urban Indian Collective, and Sovereign Bodies Institute. We're working with them and trying to form, trying to fill in those data gaps to get more accurate assessment of the impact of this issue across the entire Native country, not just parts of Native country. And I think it's important to start building those bridges of solidarity within ourselves as well. And any Native people that are watching, you know, we need to be compiling our data together to get more accurate numbers, to get more accurate statistics. You know, remembering that cases like Faith Hedgepath, where I was talking about the UNC student, they need to be included in unsolved murders of Indigenous women. Their families need to be included in these conversations that we're having. They need to be included in the federal legislation, or the federal, President Trump gave a executive order to look into this issue, but non-federally recognized tribes need to be included in that as well. You know, there shouldn't be any type of dispute. This is one thing that Native country should be cohesive about, because this affects all of us. But I just need to name that. But one of the issues in the Southeast is that there is an issue with misidentification of women, which is another reason why the numbers are so skewed. So your Bettina is saying she has Indigenous identity, but she will be labeled as a Black woman, a Black missing woman. A lot of women in my community, I'm very racially ambiguous. I'd probably be labeled as white, or maybe Latina, or my name is Arabic, so I might be labeled as something else. I don't know, but it's important to address that and the data gaps as well.
That's a very good point. That means there's a lot of information out there that's just kind of lost.
So that means the numbers are a lot bigger than they actually are.
Wow.
And they look on paper. Yeah, this is a bigger issue than it seems.
I have a question. You've been using the term a fairly recognized tribe. What does that mean exactly, and how does a tribe become, I don't know, officially recognized, quote unquote?
So this is a very political discussion, but there's a lot of different interpretations of it. And I'll just be blunt about it. I'm gonna be completely 100% transparent and honest, because that's how I like to keep it. So fairly recognized tribes have what is known as sovereignty. Sovereignty is having autonomy and your own government, and you have government to government relationship with the US government. the lands of sovereign tribes are held in government trust, so they're protected. And I'm also transparent. I'm not as well versed in Indian law and status, but yes, nation, nationality, exactly. And that's something. My mind's always going like 100 miles a minute when it comes to this topic specifically, because there's so many things that we could be asking for and doing with sovereignty, true sovereignty, and exercising certain rights and acting as like independent nations is really what every tribal nation wants to have. We want to have our own systems. We don't want to rely on the federal government as much. But for non-federally recognized tribes, most of us, like the other 8 tribes in North Carolina, minus Tuscarora, unfortunately, we're working on that too, have state recognition. So we still have that type of relationship with the state governments. We have our territories acknowledged by the state governments, but we're working on getting that federal status for between us and the federal government. And like I said, my tribe, we actually, we get federal funding for housing aid, but as I said before, we don't get funding for health services and other things that come with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Department of Interior. So again, like I'm not the person to that's not my expertise. That's my understanding of it. So whenever these federal legislation is being created, it's important to ask that question: does it include non-federally recognized tribes as well? And a lot of times it doesn't. So that's another area of advocacy for Indigenous people and for allies.
That's like another loophole that the government uses.
Yeah, and the whole thing is like it's a government created system, and it's another system that divides us.
Yes.
It creates so much division, and it's, you know, it's so arbitrary when you think about it, honestly, to a certain extent. But I'm not going to get into that because.
Thank you, though. I think that you answered very well. Thank you. Someone asked, James says, what are the barriers within the Native community?
I think James wanted to ask a question, Brenda.
Oh yeah, and she just asked me to answer. So
Okay,
thank you for being here. And Brenda, I just want to say you're doing a fantastic job doing what you do. And it's a great kind of spirit that you add to the conversation. So my question is, what are some of the barriers within the Native community? You kind of just mentioned one, but that make it difficult to gain agreement on how to tackle these issues. So, I mean, I have lots of things that run through my head as far as options, but I want to hear from you what you think those barriers are in the community. So for example, I'm thinking, if I'm thinking of my community as my family, and these things are happening to people in my family, like, why wouldn't I organize, get the technology that I need to defend myself and keep it from happening, right? So that's kind of my question.
There's a lot of things. Every community of color has an extent of internalized oppression. And so sometimes we enforce ideologies that were never our own. So with again, for the recognition thing, that's another tactic that was created for division, divide and conquer. And it's preventing us from really creating that cohesiveness and solidarity as Indigenous people. And it's not everyone that's like that. It's 50-50, just like the Black community. There's people that just have different views on certain things. People have different views about colorism, for example. So the same thing with the Indigenous community with sovereignty, or with federal recognition. People just, they treat it differently
Yeah.
and perspectives on it. So there's, and again, that's just it's another tool of division, and recognizing certain privileges that come with certain statuses, and understanding the implications of that, and recognizing that some of us are more marginalized than others, even within the Indigenous communities.
Right.
Yeah, so.
So, because I want to comment on, so for example, if we take, why is Northern Africa mostly Islamic at this point, right? It's mostly Islamic at this point because of beheadings, right? I'm not trying to be funny, but at the end of the day, it's a system of government that says, if you're not obedient to this system, we're going to take your head off. And I mention that not to be, to kind of be shocking, but also to say that at the end of the day, this is kind of my thing. So people are oppressed in part by the technology that's used to oppress them. And the inability to recognize the technology that's used to control and to teach about the technology that's used to control, I think is part of what allows these systems to continue to perpetuate themselves. So for example, we mentioned divide and conquer as a tactic, right? So at minimum, right, there could be some way of explaining to the 50% that get it, right, that divide and conquer is one of the tools, and that divide and conquer tool would then not apply to that 50%. And that 50% then stays committed. And so that's just one idea. But, it's really about, one, understanding technology, and two, understanding how people become taken advantage of. And it's a group versus a group. And if I'm an individual, I have no chance of beating 50 guys that want to kill me, right? Like, unless I have some kind of tech, given the same technologies available, 50 versus 1, more than likely the one uses, right? So it's this kind of talk that I think needs to be done over and over and over and over again, so that people understand that I have to be part of a group. I have to be part of a group that's actually teaching and talking about the tools that create the solidarity. And I say that as a kind of a bridge to how conversations move towards being solution oriented instead of talking about the problem. I'm not saying we don't talk about the problem, but I'm just thinking about the whole kind of George Floyd thing, right? And how it's opened up all these conversations. And now if you look at your Facebook feeds, you're gonna see that there's actually less and less people talking about it, right? Because it's like, okay, fine, I wanna go to the beach, I wanna get stoned. Well, like, I'm tired of this, right? And so what are gonna be the tools that are used to continue the conversation for the people that get it and make them more and more organized, such that the way it's handled becomes attractive and is able to have more of an impact. That's me and my little diatribe, but I think it's, I think it's important to be solution oriented.
I hear you. I hear you. And
go ahead.
For sure. I think that I addressed earlier that there's a lot of grassroots organizations across the country that have impact on this issue. Like, I'm not the person, I do not sit here and lament about how oppressed I am. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm a victim. I don't believe in that. I have a warrior mentality. I'm a fight. So I'm a fighter. But, it is important to talk about the heavy stuff and talk about the emotional, laborious stuff too, because this stuff is emotional. And when it comes to something like missing and murdered Indigenous women, I can't sit here and not address the victims. I can't sit here and not name some of the victims, because that's what this is about. This is about the victims, this is about their families, and this is about bringing justice to them. And I think it's important, especially with this issue, not to take any type of ego twist to it. Like, this is not about me. It's about addressing the issues around it, but it always goes back to the victims and their families. Even with the George Floyd situation, it should always go back to the victim and his family. And I think that highlights a bigger issue in advocacy in general, where people tend to tie their ego to the movement. And when you tie your ego to the movement, what's the purpose of being involved in the movement? Are you doing the movement to perpetuate your own platforms, to perpetuate yourself? Are you doing that movement to perpetuate the people who are oppressed? Because at a certain point, I think that when some people get to a certain level in advocacy, certain people get a certain following, and they stop having the same message that they had before. And it becomes about how can I get more followers? How can I get more views? And it stops being about the victim. It stops being about the issue. And the ego is destructive, exactly. It stops being about the movement. And we always have to keep reminding ourselves, we have to keep doing the inner work to make sure that we're not making it about us. It is never about us. The issue may be an extension of us, it may be an extension of our people, but it's still about the victims. It's still about the collective liberation. It's never about us.
So Amina, in respect to time, I want to ask you one last question, which is, if we want to learn more, if we want to support your cause, or just specifically support you personally and the organizations that you work with, where can we find more information? Do you have any suggestions for literature or films or podcasts that we can listen to?
I'm reading this book right now. This is an amazing book. Valerie Clark, See No Stranger. This is the key to creating solidarity for everyone. I mean, this highlights what the problem is. When you see no stranger, you eradicate. You have to attempt to really love people. Because you're not seeing like what makes you guys different, you're seeing what makes you the same. And I think that's important because one of the things that I stress is that solidarity is not a competition. We shouldn't feel that we're competing against each other when it comes to advocating for our causes. And when we start finding that common humanity with each other, that's when we're going to actually have that's when we're actually going to start seeing real change. Where we're not just advocating for the extensions of ourselves, but we're advocating for people who don't look like us as well, who we may not have the same experiences like as well. But I do have an Instagram, so you guys can find me at Mimi Janae, but I also have a website, goodmedicinewoman.com, and I'm not calling myself a medicine woman. When I say good medicine, I'm just spreading good medicine. Stories are good medicine. The revolution is good medicine, so that's the type of stuff I talk about on there.
Could you please put those in the chat, your handle and your website?
Yes. And also for Missing and Murdered, I've just encouraged you guys to keep following what Missing and Murdered USA is doing, following federal legislation, what they're doing on a federal level to resolve this issue. And again, President Trump actually issued a executive order back in November to create more task force for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So following along with that and making sure that they're following through on that legislation. Follow Deb Holland, Sharice Davis, Red House series. I mean, I can go on and on, but I'll put some of these in the chat as well.
Thank you. We will also include them in our resource guide, and we will post them on our pages on Facebook. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are so delighted to have your time and your energy and your beautiful words here with us today. It really means a lot. I didn't know what to expect, and I'm so happy you came through. I feel that I really learned a lot, and hopefully everyone listening has learned a lot too and feels inspired, and even can somehow relate it to their own personal experiences of oppression and injustice, and the desire to support others and to create change, perpetual change, positive change. So, okay. Again, I want to mention we have our resource guide, which is updated every week. First of all, if you need any support that you don't see on the resource guide, you're always welcome to email us at triumphlifecenter@gmail.com. If you have any questions about resources specifically in New York or New Jersey, we can really help you out with that. And also, if you have any, quite honestly, I'm thinking if you have any suggestions for topics that you would like to discuss during this time that we have together, you're welcome to do that too. Any questions, any comments, any testimonials, pictures, articles, you're welcome to send it to us. We have our usual information about COVID-19 and updates on that, at least in New York State. Again, with the census, complete the census, please. It can really, really support your community, and it takes like 10 minutes. You can do it online. It's available in multiple languages. You can do it over the phone as well, but that will really increase funding, hopefully increase funding for a lot of social services in your own community. So, okay, that's all I want to say. I think that's it. So we have sort of a little memorial or a little tribute. So Wesley, if you're still here, you can play some music and we'll take a look at some of these slides that we have prepared.
Save the life of this little girl. How come? How long? It's not right. It's so wrong. Do we let it just go on? Turn our backs and carry on. Wake up, it's too late. Right now we cannot wait. She won't have a second try. Open up your hearts as well as your eyes. Oh, yeah, yeah. She tried to give a cry for help. She'd even blame things on herself, but no one came to her aid. Nothing was wrong as far we could tell. That's what we like to tell ourselves, but no, it wasn't that way. So she fell in love with the wrong kind of man, and she played with her life for loving that man. So we cannot ignore, we must look for the sign. And maybe next time we could save somebody's life. How come? How long? It's not right. It's so wrong. Do we let it just go on? Turn our backs and carry on. Wake up before it's too late. Right now we cannot wait. We won't have a second try. Open up your heart as well as your eyes, as well as your eyes.
Thank you. Who is singing with you? That was beautiful.
My name is Jackie Hebas.
Hi, Jackie Ebus. Welcome. That was beautiful.
And right in the middle of this, I told her the conversation and said like, let's play a song that talks about that. It's like such
Wow.
strong subject, and it's thanks for the knowledge, like everyone. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. So I think the song was
Yes.
a good one for that situation.
Yes.
It was
Yes,
perfect.
it was.
Thank you, thank you, thank
Oh, it made me cry.
you. Yes, thank you, and thank you, Amina. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Let's have our closing prayer.
Let us pray. We cannot merely pray to you, O God, to end war, for we know that you have made the world in a way that people must find their own path to peace within themselves and with their neighbors. We cannot merely pray to you, O God, to end starvation, for you have already given us the resources with which to feed the entire world, if we would only use them wisely. We cannot merely pray to you, O God, to root out prejudice, for you have already given us eyes with which
Creepy though,
to
but I'm
see
like,
the good in all people, if we would only use them rightly. We cannot merely pray to you, O God, to end despair, for you have already given us the power to clear away slums and to give hope, if we would only use our power justly. We cannot merely pray to you, O God, to end disease, for you have already given us great minds with which to search out cures and healings, if we would only use them constructively. Therefore, we pray to you instead, O God, for strength, determination, and willpower to do instead of just pray, to become instead of merely to wish.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brenda.
sure.
Thank you, everyone that joined us on today. God bless. Thank you, Amina.
Thanks, everybody. If the staff could stay on so we can talk a little bit after.
Thank you guys. It was nice to meet all of you.
Amina, if you can hang around for just a moment, I just want to get
Oh.
permission from you off camera, okay?
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, everyone. Be safe, be well.
Be safe and be well.
Wait a second.